Hello and welcome. I'm Julie Wallace, and this is The Naked Truth, and I thank you all for joining me today. I have to admit, it's intimidating standing up here as opposed to sitting down there with the rest of you. If you read my bio, you know I'm the layman amongst you. My professional background, as Carol said, is in communications and not healthcare. I have no formal medical training. What I do have, as many my age do, is extensive healthcare experience from the other side of the bed. As a caregiver, a family member, a friend. And I'd like to take this time to share some of my experience with you. One day about 15 years ago, I was sitting in the lobby of a local hospital taking a break from a long stint at my sister's bedside when I felt a surge of emotion. She was on the main floor recovering from a mastectomy and complex reconstructive surgery. My mother was one floor up, recovering from double pneumonia. And my second sister would soon join the group with her own breast cancer surgery. In that moment, in that lobby, the weight of it all landed square in my gut, and I promised my higher healthcare power that I would give myself freely to the system that was keeping my family intact. There were only 5 of us total, so that was 3 in the system at that time. I started by adding my voice to Spectrum Health's Executive Patient and Family Advisory Council. Over time, I branched out to other committees, community and state initiatives, and today marks another step as I stand before this national audience today. I am a believer in the concept of advanced care planning and shared decision making. I believe in the work you do. From my perspective as a patient, a caregiver, and an advocate, nothing else makes sense. When the grassroots effort started in West Michigan, I gladly joined in. I have offered my hand to any group or initiative willing to take it and plan to continue doing so. I found my way to Wisconsin 2 years ago for the first convening of this group because I wanted to see who else was out there and how they were approaching this work. I came away inspired, elated, and defeated, all at the same time. This is a mountain we're climbing. You all know that, right? So while your brains are abuzz with fresh data and new concepts, let this be a moment of reflection, a moment of proof and validation that the path you are on is not just the right path, it's the only path to the improved healthcare outcomes we all seek. So just a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was a child of the 60s and 70s, a time when people didn't talk openly about illness or death. On top of that, I came from a small, insular family of mainly German and Dutch descent, the kind that never spoke of anything unpleasant. By the time I was 12, I lost all 4 of my grandparents and witnessed none of it. Not a hospital visit, not a casket, not a discussion, nothing. My father's mother died slowly over a period of months in the house next door from the ravages of leukemia. She was one of the most important people in my life, and I wasn't allowed anywhere near her. Her death haunted me into adulthood, and my father and I didn't discuss it until he faced his own death 4 years ago. When I was a senior in high school, I signed up for a new and somewhat controversial class at my high school called On Death and Dying, based on the writings of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You should have seen the look on my mother's face when she saw it on my class schedule. I still have all my notes from that class. It had a profound impact on me. Finally, it was okay to talk about death and dying, at least in some circles. Since then, I have experienced my share of losses and the medical traumas of those closest to me. Instead of keeping a quiet distance, I often find myself deeply involved in these health journeys. This, I'm sure, comes from a desire to help, as well as my need to see everything I was kept away from as a child. So I'd like to begin with the woman who started it all for me, my great Aunt Dode. She was my first experience with a healthcare crisis, and the woman who opened my eyes to the pitfalls of what I call not knowing, not telling. Late in the summer of 1995, Dode suffered a severe skull fracture when she fell on the basement floor without breaking her fall. She was taken to a local ER by ambulance thanks to a neighbor who also happened to be a doctor. She underwent emergency surgery, and by the time I saw her, she was in recovery with an open skull, several drains coming from her exposed brain, and she was grimacing and pulling her limbs together in a primitive gesture. The sight was so grim, I ran from the room to regain the blood I had lost in my own head. Dode survived the surgery, but never regained consciousness. Her children came in from the West Coast, and we spent many days at her bedside with no change. The only relief to the monotony was the daily visit by the neighbor/doctor who would step into the room, put his hand on my great-uncle's shoulder, and assure him that his wife would return home fully recovered by Thanksgiving. His visits disturbed me. Was he serious? Eventually, the doctors gave Dode a feeding tube and sent her off to the first available long-term care facility for rehabilitation. Not our first choice, just the first available. She spent her remaining days in her room with several other patients, unaware of her cold, sterile surroundings or the sad state we often found her in, soiled with vomit or soaked in urine. We kept a picture of a younger Dode on her bedside table to remind the staff of the vibrant woman now trapped in this shell, but it did no good, and she slipped away quietly and alone a few weeks after admission. Sad story, but not atypical for an 89-year-old suffering this sort of trauma, although you might think differently when I tell you that this 89-year-old was a practicing Christian Scientist and had been since the age of 2.5. For those not familiar with the Christian Science faith, the church was founded in the mid-19th century by a woman named Mary Baker Eddy on the principle that sickness is an illusion that can be corrected by prayer alone. My great-aunt was the last of my family fully committed to the faith. When she came through the doors of that ER, Dode's medical history was a blank slate, and her family was completely unversed in anything healthcare. The medical staff, working in trauma mode, didn't ask anything beyond what they needed to know about her physically, and we didn't say anything because nobody asked for our input. Who were we to turn, or stop the wheels of emergency medicine? But hindsight is everything, and afterward it was easy to see how our precious Dode fell victim to silence and died in conflict with the values she held so dear. So while my great aunt exposed me to the consequences of not knowing, not telling, I credit her husband for making things right and exposing me to the beauty of full disclosure. 2 years after Dode died, Les was diagnosed with colon cancer. He too was a practicing Christian Scientist, but probably more for the love of Dode than for the actual faith, and so he was open to traditional treatment. He had surgery and a regimen of chemo. He was also in his late 80s, and I remember the treatment taking a toll on his good nature. Not surprising, the first round of chemo wasn't a total success, and by the next year, the doctor suggested a more aggressive strategy. It was Christmas, and I remember Les turning to me in the kitchen while we were doing dishes and asking me if I'd be mad if he stopped treatment. I felt relieved and touched. I had noticed his failing health, and I was grateful for his lack of denial. I gave him my full support, and he started preparing for the end of his journey. Maybe it was the experience with Dode, the effects of his illness, or maybe it was simply his determinate nature, but Les took full control at that point. He opted out of treatment and called in hospice. Under his direction, we moved him into the living room of his log cabin, situating a hospital bed in front of the picture window where he could watch his birds and the Thornapple River flowing below. We decorated the room with cards and flowers from well-wishers and left the front door open for the many, many visitors who stopped to talk, bring food, share a cup of tea, or just hold his hand. He was very popular. He took his time with everyone, and when he felt complete, he simply stopped eating and drinking and slipped away peacefully with his family at his side on a crisp, sunny winter morning. I asked the caregiver from hospice if I could help her prepare Les for the funeral home, and she gave me a hug and handed me a washcloth and a bar of soap. My sisters, his daughter, and a visitor from Australia joined in, and we bathed him and dressed him in his favorite red knit vest, all the while singing. What I don't remember anymore, but I do remember we were singing. Afterward, we pulled up the covers around him and invited people to visit one more time if they wished. That night, we gave Les over to the funeral home and went to our own homes with peace in our hearts. It was the most difficult and beautiful thing I had ever been a part of. Up to that point, I had never witnessed the actual dying process, had never seen, let alone touched, a dead body. But Les gave me the strength and courage to do so, and it was the greatest gift he could have ever given me. He made it all happen. He was clear and steadfast in his wishes and desires, and we were there to see it through, and it was a beautiful thing. Could he have lived longer? Perhaps, but he wasn't going to live much longer. And so he chose quality over quantity, and the rest of us witnessed his peace, and that was a gift to us all. While Dode and Les introduced me to issues around the end of life, it was my sisters who exposed me to the realities of serious illness, and more specifically, cancer treatment, and in my opinion, a complete lack of transparency on the part of most professionals in this field. Back in 2003, my two sisters were diagnosed with breast cancer 1 month apart. My oldest sister's husband took over her care, which left me free to take care of my middle sister who had no family at the time. I still have all of my notes from our initial meetings with the surgeon, the oncologist, the radiation oncologist, and the plastic surgeon. They each proposed their treatment plan for my sister's cancer in a clear, concise way. Their expertise and passion were obvious. They were enthusiastic and positive about their approach to her treatment. They drew diagrams, gave statistics, and outlined processes and timelines on whiteboards. I wrote it all down in this book for my sister to refer to, and I was really proud of this. We were being a good and proactive team. But now when I look at it almost 15 years later, I'm struck by the obvious. I only remember listening and writing. There was no discussion or discourse. Nobody engaged my sister or me. They never asked her about her life, her work, her need to keep working, her lifestyle, her support system, her fears, what she understood about her illness, her prognosis, how treatment could and would affect her day-to-day life, and her future health. Nothing. They simply delivered a one-size-fits-all presentation. A picture of cancer treatment like a smooth ribbon of highway from diagnosis to recovery. Well, as you all know, and we were soon to learn, that smooth ribbon of treatment usually includes a number of potholes and detours, even with the best of intentions. What we didn't understand in the beginning was the fact that treatment steps are not a given. They are criteria dependent, most of which lie outside a patient's control. For every step forward, there's always a possibility a complication could set you back too. Like when the surgeon accidentally nicked my oldest sister's lung during her first surgery, or when chemo treatments had to be postponed because of an infection or poor blood counts, or when my middle sister's body rejected her reconstructed breast and they had to start all over again, or when either of them experienced an unforeseen negative reaction to a prescription or suffered from dehydration. Had my sisters missed the entrance ramp to that smooth road to recovery the doctors presented? Or did that entrance ramp really exist in the first place? While neither of my sisters experienced anything out of the ordinary, the whole experience was extraordinary for us because they were sisters in treatment at the same time. In less than a year between the two, we endured almost 20 surgical procedures, 20 chemo treatments, 20 radiation treatments, and umpteen scans, tests, and labs. We powered through double the effects of chemo that resulted in trips to the ER, home visits in the middle of the night, panic calls to the doctor, and the emotional strife that comes with the loss of body parts, body hair, and forced menopause. It was as if we got drafted into our own private war without any support troops. The good news is this war came to an end, and we came through it together. The bad news is we didn't come out as we had gone in. The experience took a physical and emotional toll on all of us. For my middle sister, that damage has been permanent, resulting in severe depression, loss of employment, addiction issues, and physical disability. My oldest sister fared better, but lives in constant fear for her health and has suffered her own long-term effects from treatment. Cancer is harsh. Treatment is tough. Getting through it requires physical and emotional stamina. Stamina often taxed by the unexpected and often frightening setbacks and side effects common to treatment, but not common to patients and caregivers. And so often these events occur outside of normal office hours when it seems the ER is the only option for support. Now you may be saying to yourself, things have changed since your sisters went through treatment. But sadly, I'm here to tell you, from my perspective, they have not. I have traveled this road with other family members and dear friends since then, and they have hit some of the same ruts. Not too long ago, I took my best friend to her oncology appointment while her husband was traveling. She was 9 months into treatment for pancreatic cancer. Ironically, her oncologist happened to be the same as my sister's 12 years later. And he was still giving the same whiteboard presentation verbatim. I emphasize the word presentation because there was little to no discussion during the entire appointment. Just a description of her 9-month treatment path and her chemotherapy choices going forward. My friend left that appointment in tears, convinced she had somehow failed her oncologist because her progress was at a standstill and somehow she was responsible. She died 4 months later. In hindsight, I think the doctor was trying to explain that he was running out of treatment options and that her time was short. But his message got lost somewhere deep in that roundabout presentation, and instead of clarity, he left his patient desperate for answers. Excuse me. If my sisters were the poster girls for the issue of transparency, my mom and dad stepped up for the issue of what I call fractured communication and treatment. By the time of my parents' demise, I was feeling confident that as a family we could handle anything healthcare related, and that our exposure to this point had prepared us for anything that may lay ahead. Well, it didn't, and it didn't. As prepared as you think you will be, you forget you're being affected on an emotional level, and it's not always easy to see things as they truly are. Complicating matters is our specialized and fractured approach to healthcare. We've moved far from the one doctor, various ills platform. Now we have a specialist for each ailment, and most likely if you make it past the age of 70, you're going to have several doctors involved in your care, and the question will linger. Who knows the whole story? Who is managing the big picture? Who gives the final command? Both my parents fit into this very common category. My mother's story begins with that bout of double pneumonia I mentioned earlier. Over the years, she had grown lax in her routine medical care. In fact, we couldn't remember, and she would not reveal, the last time she had a routine physical. So the stint in the hospital wasn't such a bad thing because she got a complete workup. Of course, that workup revealed some concerns. So now the woman who had no doctor began creating her own advisory group, including a primary care physician, a hematologist, and a neurologist. She and my father managed until a few months later when her behavior began to change. She rarely left the house. She stopped seeing and talking to her friends, became argumentative, but not in a logical way. And then one night, she invited me over for dinner, but came home from the grocery store with 2 pork chops for 3 people and nothing else. Luckily, my father intervened and saved us from a trip to a fast food restaurant. But that event marked the beginning of an unavoidable slide down a very slippery slope. So many questions, so many professionals. The new primary care hematologist and neurologist weighed in, along with a psychologist and a nutritionist. Scads of tests and labs were conducted. We were bombarded with information, but the big picture remained unseen. Was it Alzheimer's or dementia? A side effect of her blood disorder or a lingering effect of the double pneumonia? A stroke? Depression brought on by my sister's cancer? Do we or don't we treat it with drugs? How would it progress over time? What do we do with her today, tomorrow, next week, next year? My parents were 78 at the time. My father was overwhelmed. My sisters were still in treatment, and there was very little energy left for my poor mother. None of us were comfortable with the information we had or the choices we were given. But what more could we do? Just as we reached the end of our rope, a knot appeared that kept us from sliding off completely, and it came in the form of a local geriatrician with a private practice. My mom had a champion. One person who would manage her care for the rest of her life. We met with her 2 to 4 times per year, depending on the need. Each appointment was an hour to an hour and a half, and the entire family was encouraged to attend. My mother loved her. Every appointment, and that became important as her disease progressed, every appointment began with an open, inclusive discussion around how we were all doing, how we could make things better together, what the results of my mother's latest appointments and labs revealed, and what others she might need at this time. The remainder of each appointment was between the doctor and my mother in private. I had never experienced care like this before. With the geriatrician's help, we were able to keep our sanity, and not just keep, but enjoy my mother at home with my father as her primary caregiver until the night she died. Having a champion available 24/7 simplified things for all of us and gave us the confidence to let my mother live out her life in the only place she would eventually remember, and where she was the most safe, the most happy, and the most loved. So that brings me to my dad, who left us 2 years later. He fared well for about a year after my mother passed, and then things took a 90-degree turn. Still fresh from the passing of my mom, we knew we would keep him home until the end, which we did, but not without getting bumped and bruised along the way. My dad suffered from several maladies, as listed in one of his ER admissions: acute congestive heart failure, hyperthyroidism, hyperlipidemia, atrial fibrillation, gouty arthritis, and aortic stenosis. Not listed: prostate cancer, severe anemia, and chronic back pain from several crushed discs suffered in a past accident. Pain that affected his sleep, his daily life, and his overall mood. Now, there was a time when these issues coexisted peacefully like warring factions during a truce, but at the end of my dad's life, they took up arms and opened fire. Like many his age, he kept these issues to himself until he couldn't manage it anymore. This made proactive caregiving impossible, and it seemed my sister and I were in constant reaction mode, jumping from ER visit to hospital admission, to home care, to doctor's appointments, to rehab, and on and on. Finally, during the umpteenth visit to his primary care office, the doctor looked at this swelling novella his medical records were becoming, put her hand on my knee, and suggested it was time to stop and change course. I called hospice that afternoon. My dad was very relieved and died peacefully 3 weeks later at home as planned. I didn't think much about the whole experience until I was asked to speak about it in a panel discussion soon after. In preparation for the event, I went back and documented what medically transpired the last year of my father's life. The result was a picture that spoke volumes to how quickly things can go awry and how fractured communication and care can become when they do, and how frustrating that is for family and caregivers alike. These are my father's medical records from that year. And this is his list of medications. I think there were 13 in all, with 2 to 3 different doses throughout each day. These took me usually over 3 hours each week to prepare. And here's his medical itinerary from his final 2 months. 3 visits to the ER, 2 hospital admissions, 4 visits to his primary care office, 1 visit to the cardiologist, which resulted in an additional trip to the ER, and yet another hospital admission, 1 visit to the urologist, 1 CAT scan, multiple lab visits, weekly in-home nursing care, occupational therapy, regular in-home physical therapy, and daily telehealth monitoring. 1 week alone included 2 trips to the ER, 1 hospital admission, 2 office visits, in-home nursing, along with occupational and physical therapy. I nearly lost my mind because it was really just me at that point. In fact, one of the ER reports mentions that the daughter, me, was visibly upset. That was an understatement. It wasn't the time and effort I found exasperating. It was the mounting opinions and care plans. Every encounter with a new doctor, nurse, or therapist brought with it a whole new perspective and a whole new plan for whatever symptom we happened to be faced with at that moment. Now, my father did have an advance directive. We filled it out together with the help of a facilitator in the comfort of his kitchen. But his advance directive was only as good as any doctor's interest in it. And there was little interest because none of the doctors we encountered was treating my whole father. Each was only treating a piece of him, pieces they deemed fixable. And so in their estimation, my dad was doing okay. But he was anything but okay. And if any one of those doctors could have or would have taken just 1 step back for a better view, they would have seen the shattered windshield my father had become. I have no regrets about my father's death. My sister and I were by his side through it all. He died on Thanksgiving night, and she and I toasted him as he slipped from consciousness. I will never forget the cool sweetness of his forehead as I kissed him into his final breath. I do regret not knowing how we got to the end or why we got there when we did. I still can't put the pieces together. If you asked me, I couldn't tell you which of his ailments gave the final blow. Maybe it was none of them. Maybe it all just got too complicated and he simply gave up. Fractured communication is a robber. It robs us of answers and clarity when we need them most and leaves us helpless when called upon to grapple with life's most precious decisions. Okay, we're at present day, and one of the hardest lessons I have faced, knowing the patient. This is my cousin Julie. She's the daughter of Dode and Les, who you met earlier. She's in her early 70s and resides in Seattle, Washington. She is 5 years retired from a 27-year career as a legal expert and claims adjuster with State Farm Insurance. She never married and has no children. Now, on the surface, she paints a quiet and unassuming picture. But when I was a kid, Julie was my exotic and unconventional cousin who would visit from faraway places like Guatemala, Kinshasa, Washington, D.C., or Los Angeles. She grew up in Hawaii and didn't wear shoes to school. She worked in a U.S. embassy for the CIA, went to law school, learned to fly an airplane, and always owned her own home. This was in the 60s and 70s, when most women I knew that were her age were well into a conventional marriage with kids a little younger than me. Julie has always been a role model for me, Even in retirement, she continues to take on unique challenges like teaching citizenship classes to immigrants or taking on new skills like woodworking and upholstering, not to fill her time, but because she has a deck to build or a sofa to recover. Like her parents, Julie practiced the Christian Science faith well into adulthood. She enjoyed a life free of medical strife and turned 70 with little to no medical history. And then in May of 2016, the tables turned when she received a diagnosis of stage 2 colon cancer. And she took her first step into the contemporary healthcare system. My initial concern had nothing to do with Julie's treatment and everything to do with the treatment of Julie. I believed if the doctors didn't take the time to really get to know her, it could spell disaster. Luckily, Julie's brother Robert also lives in the Seattle area, and he stepped up to lend his support. We had a long talk before their initial meeting with the oncologist. I urged Robert to do his best to make sure the doctor had a clear picture of Julie beyond the patient. But from his reports, it became clear the opportunity for such a discussion never presented itself, and Julie, like most people, was more concerned with starting treatment than shopping doctors, and so it became a moot point. By the end of the month, Julie underwent surgery and started chemotherapy. It seemed we were off to a good start. I was encouraged by our phone conversations where she came across her usual strong, steady, pragmatic self. But as we came into midsummer, that voice began to tremble and break apart from the fear and anxiety that Julie admitted she was beginning to suffer from. She raised the issue with her oncology team, who never truly acknowledged it. As summer progressed, this anxiety continued to escalate unchecked until Julie decided the only solution was to stop chemo. She did her research and withdrew from treatment after 6 rounds. The anxiety eased but didn't subside. Julie did everything she could to address the issue herself, but it became clear to all of us that she needed medical support. We weren't worried that she would take her own life or harm herself, but that she would simply stop living. Finally, sometime around the holidays, her care team addressed the anxiety, and by the new year, the old Julie began to emerge. So I wish this could be the happy ending you all are hoping for, but little did we know, this was only the beginning. A year ago last October, I shared Julie's cancer journey at a statewide medical conference. Ironically, the day I was presenting to a room of professionals as I am today, Julie was entering the healthcare system for a second time. Chemotherapy had aggravated an existing hip issue that couldn't be ignored, so Julie was undergoing the first of 2 prescribed hip replacements. We weren't overly concerned. Hip surgery would be a walk in the park compared to cancer treatment. The surgery proceeded as planned, and Julie returned home to enjoy her recovery with the help of a friend. Everything was fine until Julie fell and the stem of the new hip shattered. That incident landed her in the ER and then into rehab. A subsequent MRSA infection at the incision site landed her back in the ER with a return to rehab. At that point, Julie's emotional state took a nosedive again, and she repeatedly told me when I called that something didn't feel right. She just couldn't stop crying. This from a lifelong claims adjuster, not normal. When she brought this to her nurse's attention, they advised her to calm down and breathe deeply. At the urgence of concerned friends and family, Julie's regular physician paid her a surprise visit. This physician is actually Julie's longtime naturopath, the person she calls doctor, and the person we call lifesaver. Immediately upon seeing Julie, she suspected kidney failure and insisted Julie be transferred to the nearest ER. The rehab staff disagreed and refused to arrange transport. The naturopath called for an ambicab herself. The ER team validated her suspicions. Something had gone awry with the antibiotics Julie was taking for the MRSA infection, and she was indeed in kidney failure. Colon cancer and hip deterioration had been replaced by systemic invisibility as the biggest threat to Julie's life. In early January, Julie finally went home to heal, 3 months and 3 hospital readmissions after her initial surgery. Today, Julie is feeling herself again. She scheduled her second hip replacement last spring and entered the system for a 3rd time with the confidence of a warrior. This time, the system rewarded her with a picture-perfect procedure. I flew out in July to find Julie walking, driving, and happy to be alive. We spent a week talking into the wee hours and reviewing her ordeal from beginning to end. Even during the worst of her experience, Julie remained philosophical, continuously looking for the silver lining and the precious lessons to be learned. When she physically came around from her cancer treatment, she decided to tend to her emotional scars with the help of a therapist and a life coach. As part of her recovery, she was encouraged to write a letter to the professionals who treated her. This was intended as a therapeutic exercise only. She really struggled with this assignment. Expressing raw emotion does not come easily to her. One day, I asked if she would share the letter with me, and after reading it through, I got really gutsy and asked if I could share it with you. To my surprise, she agreed. She sees it as part of her spiritual growth that maybe this private expression, originally intended for no one, might now take flight and possibly help someone. So, from my dearest cousin Julie, Craig, unplugged. Dear surgeon and medical system and national protocols, I am very angry and sad about the way I've been treated, disrespected. I am a person, not a national statistic. Everything was rushed through, very efficient, but no time for me to think or get my balance. It was not emergency surgery. It is my body, and I am living the rest of my life, not you. It is not your decision how long I live, the max possible or less, or what the quality of that life is. I should have been given all the options. No assumptions made about how I feel. You have invaded my body based on your assumptions. You had no right to do that. I hate that this has been done to me. I can't say that I hate you because I know in your mind you were doing what was best and feeling good about it. But I hate that you had more authority than me. My body is my domain exclusively. You have no right to make judgments or decisions about it. I went to you for advice, not to take over. Your decision has changed my life forever, and I can't do anything about that now. I resent that. And it makes me very sad. I'm blaming myself, too. I probably will never see you again, but I see me every day. I'm one of many to you, but I'm one of one to me. And in parentheses, she says, now at this point, my perspective changed, and I ended with this. I am very sad and angry about this now, but I think on some vague level that it will all be okay and will be a growing lesson, a big growing lesson. So I forgive you, and I forgive myself, and I forgive the whole medical system. So thank you all for hearing this presentation through. I know it doesn't paint the picture we'd all like to see, but please remember, I wrote this to validate the work you are doing, and while I may be standing in front of you at this moment, I pledge to work beside you as we continue this work toward a better medical future for everyone. Thank you very much. Don't make me cry. That's
okay. See what I mean about her compelling honesty? Yeah, right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Do you want? Are you okay with questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So we do have some time for questions. If anyone has any or would like to say anything. Okay. Then I think. Oh yes. Sorry.
I'd just like to make one comment. I'm a retired internist. I practiced for over 40 years. I got my medical training at Women's Medical College, which was then all women. It's now Harvard Drexel University. And we were trained in treating people as individuals and practice what later was called holistic medicine before it became popular or then. And in my practice, I spend more time asking questions.
What would you like to see as the first thing that a physician would say to you when they present the diagnosis of cancer? What advice would you give that physician? That's probably putting you at the spot.
No, that's okay.
My
Because
husband.
I haven't been in that position myself. I've only been there with others, but especially with Julie, I just had this horrible gut feeling. It was like, somebody got to tell him. She knows nothing. She's never been in this before. She has no family. She lives alone. Somebody's got to make it really clear. And that's why I thought, if he would at least engage in a discussion with her and her brother about, so tell me about your life. Tell me about who you are and what you understand. And if she had talked about her faith at all, I think that would have started. So she is one of the most rational human beings I know. She was so staunch in her alternative medicine strategy, she did not sign up for Medicare. She paid for her chemo in cash. Now, luckily, she's so pragmatic, she had the money to do it. But she signed up for Medicare now. But that's how, and we had a big laugh about that now, but that's how little, her faith was very strong. She never saw this coming, even though she knew what her father had died of colon cancer. She knew it was a possibility, but I think if there had just been a moment taken, it would have started a discussion that would have led to some other things.
Do you feel that physicians put up a barrier to prevent the patient from asking a question? That it wasn't easy, it wasn't...
I don't, okay, so when I went to the oncology appointment with my best friend, and that was just the most horrible thing, there wasn't any interest. He was not there to have a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at the end of the day, he seemed really tired. In fact, Lisa and I talked about that. It was like he just seemed off his game. He was irritable, he was tired, and he was trying to make a point, and it wasn't clear. He ran through like, we started here, you couldn't tolerate that, we went there, you couldn't tolerate that, and it was like, oh my Lord. And so it was like, we walked out of there and it was like, oh, I guess it's up to you now, Lisa, you got to make the decision. I think he just put it back on your plate. So he didn't want to talk to her about it. He wanted to put it out there and have her come back with an answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Pat, I'll stay on this side of the room.
Oh.
Part of your reading, and if I missed it, I apologize. So is what you just read, is that in a book? Is that published?
No, it's just right here.
It should be published. It should be a book that people can read, because as a clinical social worker in palliative care, that is so validating to so many patients and families' experience, and especially who then we meet who are angry, rightfully so, and empowered that they want to have conversations, whether they want to join the forces of this work going forward. But I encourage you to actually consider publishing that. If it's not, and I want a personal copy. I will pay you. It won't be much. I'm a social worker, but I will pay you. But I really encourage you to do so.
Thank you. Well, and I go back to, I put this thread together because this is, I lived through this over a period of 15 years and I'm still living it with Julie. I'm not any different than most people my age who's, you see it start rolling down the hill. your mom and then your dad and then and it's like, it is like going through battle. It's exhausting. And now I'm at a point where I have this has been kind of an okay time because, with Julie on the West Coast, I couldn't get out there. Plus she's very private and she had everything set up. She has this incredible group of friends and neighbors who are, oh my God, they're just so wonderful. She didn't want to do that to me. And so we kept putting it off. She was like, no, I don't want you to come now. It's not a good time now. So for 2 years, I have not been able to have contact with her physically. And so I was doing this with thousands of miles between us, and it was horrifying. I thought, and I could hear it. Robert and I talked about it. It was like, we're losing her. She's going down. I don't think we're going to get her back. I don't know what the hell we do. And so, like right now, I'm having this little reprieve, which I'm enjoying, but, for all of it, something changes it,
Julie, this is Sandy. I'm going to ask the question, or it's more of a statement and a reflection. I've had an opportunity. I'm the healthcare professional in my family, so it always kind of got delegated to my sister and I to do financial and healthcare for over half dozen family members. And your stories resonate with me because they were very similar to mine. And I don't know if I predisposed myself to high expectations because of my background, but I think your story really reflects back on us to think about transformation and what we can do to person-centered care, and what one simple thing could we do to make those scenarios different. And for me, I think if we empowered our patients to say, please, at each of my visits, take time and ask me one question, and that question is, what's most important for you today? And if we can integrate something similar to that into care and not make it a big hairy deal, to actually invite whole person, we need to figure out what that one thing is that could transform care very simply and not have to create a huge system around it, but that it invites patients and families in. So mine was just more a reflection, and it reinforced what I experienced also.
I'm right there with you, and because I just had my own little thing this summer, and so I went into the system, and I was mortified. I lose faith because I'm not sure how these conversations can happen when the entire staff, of which there are many, I don't know who, they're coming in I was in the ER, they're coming in and out. They are so scripted. Oh my God, get off your script. Don't put that smile on your face and hi, it's like, get off your script. Look at me, talk to me, somebody touch me. Could you just touch me? But I'm so afraid in these large healthcare systems, the staff cannot even, I don't even think they're thinking for themselves. They're just going by rote. And it is so frightening for a patient. It's like, get your eyes up, look at me. What color shirt am I wearing? And this is, have a discussion with me that's not your agenda. It's my agenda. So ask me questions that pertain to me. But, so I worry that I don't know where those conversations are going to get started with that behavior.
Thank you so much for sharing such a powerful story. And it triggers for me. 13 years ago, I went through pancreatic cancer with my husband, who was 50. And his oncologist, every time we'd have a serious question, would laugh. And 15 minutes into the visit would get up and go out of the room for 15 minutes before he'd come back.
Oh my God.
So all of us have these stories. My point is, all of us have these stories.
Yep.
And it just broke my heart listening to the mother at noon talk about that gastroenterologist. It just frightens me so much. And I'm working in a health system with 15,000 employees that I hope to God aren't repeating this, but I think a percentage of them are. And I just don't know, Carol and Bud and Linda, what are we doing in medical schools, nursing schools? What we're doing here is important, but we're just a tiny slice of that iceberg. And how can we do more to stop this disconnect of human beings? And maybe it's because it's so hard emotionally. I just watched Being Mortal again with Atul interviewing oncologists and cardiologists, and the emotional difficulty they go through, having people die on them, not having the answers that they're supposed to have. How do we change the way we do medicine so that it is more person-centered and family-oriented? It just seems so huge, and I'm sorry for my emotion, but it just makes such a difference for families.
Well, and outside of, we talk about medical school, but if you've gone through medical school and then you get into a system that won't let you say anything, that owns you, that doesn't let you practice autonomously at all. I mean, and I think about that oncology appointment with my friend Lisa. Maybe the oncologist I'm sure he was deflated. She was a robust 57-year-old woman, and he knew she was losing. But imagine the difference that appointment could have been if he had shown his vulnerability to her. Oh my God. Instead, I had to clean up the mess when we left. We couldn't go I couldn't take her home. She was such a mess. We had to stop at my office so she could talk. And we talked it through, and actually she ended up going to Cancer Treatment Centers of America because I said, it doesn't matter at this point. If you're unhappy, don't go back to that office. Let's right now, let's get out my laptop and figure it out. But yeah.
We have one over here. Julie, I'm going to echo what she said about putting it into a book or into a video because every one of us thinks we're the only one going through it.
Right.
It's very personal, and we think there's no one else out there that would understand what we're going through. And to see that you have been through it, that you've been able to think it through, what questions we ought to be asking, I just think is very powerful, and I don't want you to lose that thought of either writing that book, making that video. You're a communications specialist. As people who are going through it will share with you, and you share with them, that says, you are not alone.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Another question, that one over here.
I kind of have a statement and a suggestion. I'm a palliative care social worker with Kaiser and also facilitator for next steps and advanced steps and first steps. But I have found that a lot of the patients that I work with that have a cancer diagnosis, and throughout the conversation, helping them formulate the questions to ask, to empower them to ask these questions. The patients come back to me afterwards and say, thank you, because I helped them formulate, and then I empowered them to say, don't just let them keep sidestepping you. You ask it this way, then you ask it this way, then you ask it this way, until you get the answer you need. So I think it could start with each one of us in this room.
That's a good point.
Power of the conversation that we teach with advanced care planning and shared decision making goes beyond those conversations. And so how do you empower people to use those same questions you're facilitating with to be part of your visits?
I'm another palliative care social worker. Woohoo! The reason I do the work that I do is because I really want to see my patients and families at the center of the conversation, and I want their voices heard. And oftentimes I feel like my intervention has been with the physicians and the nurses, and to remind them, I've told them more than once that when I worked in oncology especially, I said, listen, this is routine for you, but it is happening for the very first time to that patient. And we need to remember and honor that. And so, I mean, obviously all of us are doing this work because we feel it's so important to flip the switch on what's happening in healthcare. I don't really have any suggestions or questions, but this is just further proof that we need to not, I don't think we just need to climb that mountain. I think we need to blast this mountain. I don't know what needs to happen, but it's and I can just only think of what's going to hit us demographically, as our baby boomers get older. And it's not going to be able to stay the same. It's just not sustainable the way it is. And so, baby boomers transform the way we give birth. So I have a feeling that as they go out, they're going to make a lot of changes. But it shouldn't take that. That there's more than just the fact that it's the right thing to do. So thank you very much for sharing your story.
I think we have time for one last question.
I just wanted to say that I'm a physician who has done palliative care and hospice care for years, and primary care, and I think there are a couple of things that we've done as a system that we lose our power to the system. Yep. The biggest thing I've seen happen is that when I came out of residency, I took care of mothers who were pregnant, I took care of babies, I took care of families, I took care of elders, I took care of the whole, and this was in a city, I took care of the whole family. In 2009, when I joined another healthcare system, I said, okay, well, do I admit my own patients to the hospital? And they said, oh, no, we have hospitalists for that. And we have given up that power because it's more convenient. I mean, good Lord, if I'm in the middle of my day and my patient crashes, I better hope I have a specialist at the hospital that can take care of that problem for me. But I have walked into a patient's room when I've been on vacation who was being taken care of by my very, very able colleagues. And they would say, oh, thank goodness you're here, and just break out into tears. Yeah. Now, that is not about that they weren't being cared for. It's because I knew who they were. Yeah. And they felt like, oh, you're here. Yeah. Someone knows me. And then I think the other thing I wanted to say is that I think it's question 11 from the game Hello, or The Gift of Grace. There's some hospitals are using this in their hospital room, and it's like, what are 3 non-medical facts you would like the medical people to know about you? And I think that's an awesome question.
So if we can thank Julie again for her honesty and her time and a beautiful story. Thank you. Thank you.